Professor Kethlar stood at the front of Lecture Hall 7, his scaled hide gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights that most species found uncomfortable, but he found absolutely perfect for intimidation purposes. His yellow reptilian eyes swept across the classroom like a predator sizing up prey, which, let's be honest, wasn't entirely inaccurate. "Welcome," he hissed, drawing out the word like a death sentence, "to Advanced Xenobiology Survival Training. Course code XB401. Also known as the class that has a 23% fatality rate and a 47% dropout rate after the first lecture." The assembled students shifted nervously in their various forms of seating arrangements. There was Pip, a mantis-like zephyrine whose compound eyes were currently registering what could only be described as existential dread. Her forearms clutched a tablet where she'd been frantically taking notes, though at this point it was mostly just the words, "Oh, oh, 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 oh," repeated in 17 different languages. Next to her sat Flen, a gelatinous Moldavian who had already begun to literally melt with anxiety, leaving small puddles of stress sweat on the floor. His translucent blue form wobbled every time Professor Kethlar spoke, like nervous jello. In the back row, Mox preened his iridescent feathers with the kind of superiority that only came from being a celestial hawk whose species had supposedly transcended primitive survival instincts. His beak was permanently fixed in what looked like a sneer, though that might have just been his face. "This semester," Kethlar continued, clearly enjoying the mounting terror, "you will learn what it truly means to survive in hostile environments. You will face your fears. You will discover your limitations. And some of you will discover that natural selection is still very much in effect." That's when the door burst open. Sorry. Traffic was absolutely insane. You wouldn't believe how backed up the transit tubes get during molting season. Plus I had to stop for coffee because, let's face it, nobody should attempt higher education without proper caffeine levels." Every head in the room turned to stare at the human who had just strolled in like he was arriving at a barbecue, instead of what was essentially advanced suicide training. Jake Martinez was average height for his species, with brown hair that looked like he'd styled it with his fingers, and wore a grin that suggested he found the entire universe mildly amusing. Professor Kethlar's eye twitched. In his 47 years of teaching, he had never had a student interrupt his intimidation speech. "And you are?" "Jake Martinez, Homo sapiens, third-year xenobiology major, with a minor in what the course catalog calls applied stupidity, but I prefer to think of as creative problem-solving." Jake plopped down in the nearest seat, which happened to be right next to the quivering Pip. Did I miss anything important, or are we still in the trying to scare everyone phase? Kethlar's forked tongue flicked out briefly, tasting the air. Humans were notorious for their unpredictability, but this one seemed particularly unimpressed. "As I was saying, this course will test every survival instinct you possess. Those who lack the necessary adaptations will not survive to see graduation." Cool, Jake nodded, pulling out what appeared to be a sandwich. "Quick question though, is this like actual survival where people die, or fun survival where we get s'mores at the end?" Pip's compound eyes swiveled toward Jake with a mixture of horror and fascination. Did you just ask if people die in the death class?" "Well, yeah. I mean, the university has insurance policies, right? Health and safety regulations. Someone from legal probably had to sign off on this whole thing." Jake took a bite of his sandwich. "Tuna fish, by the way, want half?" Flen had managed to re-solidify enough to whisper, "He's offering food, in the death class, to the bug creature." "I'm not a bug," Pip protested weakly, though she was staring at the sandwich with obvious curiosity. "We're arthropods, completely different phylogenetic classification." "My mistake," Jake said cheerfully. "Want half a sandwich, arthropod creature?" Professor Kethlar's claws scraped against the podium. "If you're quite finished with your lunch social, Mr. Martinez, perhaps you'd like to hear about your first assignment." "Oh, absolutely. Lay it on me, Professor. What fresh nightmare are we diving into?" The reptilian professor's smile revealed far too many sharp teeth. 48 hours, Razor Claw Prime, minimal equipment, and you'll be sharing the experience with the planet's apex predator. The room went dead silent, except for the sound of Flen completely liquefying and hitting the floor with a wet splat. "Razor Claw Prime?" Mox squawked, his superior attitude evaporating faster than his species' evolutionary confidence. "That's where the Shadow Maws live." "Indeed," Kethlar purred. 12 feet tall, 6 legs, razor-sharp claws, and a hunting instinct honed by millions of years of evolution. They can see in complete darkness, hear a heartbeat from 3 kilometers away, and their bite can crush titanium. Jake raised his hand. Question. Do they play fetch? 3 days later, the students found themselves crammed into a military transport ship that smelled like disinfectant and existential dread. Through the viewport, Razorclaw Prime looked exactly like the kind of planet where nature documentaries went to film things eating other things. Okay, everyone, announced Captain Vrix, a professional-looking Centaurian whose job was apparently to dump college students on death worlds. We're approaching the drop zone. You'll have basic survival kits, emergency beacons for life-threatening situations only, and the knowledge that pickup is in exactly 48 hours. Pip was documenting everything on her tablet, probably for her last will and testament. The vegetation appears to be primarily carnivorous. That tree just ate a bird. That wasn't a bird, Mox corrected, with the kind of condescension that suggested he was overcompensating for his own terror. That was clearly a small flying mammal, completely different evolutionary branch. Still dead, Flynn gurgled from his emergency stabilization container. The poor blob had been unable to maintain solid form since the briefing. Meanwhile, Jake was checking his survival kit with the casual interest of someone packing for a weekend camping trip. Let's see, emergency rations, water purification tablets, basic medical supplies, flare gun, emergency shelter. He held up what looked like a collapsible fishing rod. And apparently someone threw in a telescoping poker. Nice. That's for defending yourself against hostile wildlife, Captain Vrix explained. Or for roasting marshmallows, Jake said, eyeing the rod thoughtfully. Depends on your perspective, really. The ship lurched as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the viewport, an endless canopy of purple and green jungle stretched to the horizon, broken only by the occasional mountain that looked like it had teeth. Drop zone in 30 seconds, Vrux announced. Remember, the Shadow Maws are most active during the dawn and dusk periods. They hunt in packs, they're highly intelligent, and they've never encountered your species before, which means they don't know to be afraid of you. Should they be afraid of us? Jake asked. Statistically speaking, no. You're all going to die. The transport doors opened, revealing a clearing surrounded by jungle that looked like it had been designed by someone with serious anger management issues. Everything had thorns, spikes, or what appeared to be built-in weapons systems. One by one, the students rappelled down into what Professor Cathler had cheerfully described as natural selection in action. Pip landed first, immediately started scanning for threats with all her various sensory organs. Mox glided down with the kind of grace that came from having actual wings, though he immediately began building what looked like a fortress out of fallen branches. Vlen basically poured out of the transport and reformed into a quivering dome shape that was probably meant to be defensive, but looked more like a very anxious pudding. Jake hit the ground last, looked around at the hostile alien landscape and said, "You know what? This place has potential. Great natural acoustics, decent drainage, and look at that view." While his classmates immediately began constructing elaborate defensive positions that would have made military engineers weep with pride, Jake wandered over to a relatively flat spot and began setting up what could only be described as a campsite. Not a survival shelter, an actual campsite, complete with a hammock strung between two trees that probably wanted to eat him. "Martinez!" Pip called from behind her rapidly growing wall of sharpened sticks. "What are you doing?" "Making dinner," Jake replied, building what was unmistakably a fire pit. "Anyone know if those purple berries are poisonous?" "Everything here is poisonous!" Mox shrieked from his aerial watchtower. "That's why it's called a death world." Probably just mildly toxic. Build up an immunity, that's what I always say. As the alien sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades that suggested the planet's atmosphere might be trying to kill them too, strange sounds began echoing through the jungle. Low growls, the snap of breaking branches, and something that sounded disturbingly like very large creatures having a conversation. Pip activated her night vision and immediately regretted it. There are eyes out there. Lots of eyes. Big glowing red eyes that are definitely looking at us. Flynn had compressed himself into what was essentially a terrified marble. We're all going to die. We're all going to die in alphabetical order. From his hammock, Jake's voice drifted over, calm and utterly relaxed. That's a classic mating call pattern, probably establishing territory. The big one with the deeper growl is definitely the alpha. Good lung capacity, really commits to the performance. A sound like a freight train made of nightmares crashed through the underbrush nearby, followed by what could only be described as the universe's most terrifying game of Marco Polo. Oh, that's interesting, Jake continued, like he was narrating a nature documentary. The pack coordination is really sophisticated. I'm giving this whole soundscape an 8 out of 10. Points deducted for lack of melodic variation, but you have to appreciate the raw intimidation factor. Dawn arrived on Razorclaw Prime like a cosmic alarm clock designed by someone who hated mornings. The alien sun cast everything in an orange glow that made the jungle look even more like it wanted to commit murder. Jake woke up in his hammock, stretched, and began making what appeared to be coffee using his portable camping setup. "Morning, everyone. How'd everybody sleep?" From behind her fortress of terror, Pip's voice was hoarse from staying awake all night. "Sleep? Sleep? Did you not hear the sounds of approaching death all night long?" "Oh, those guys?" Jake gestured vaguely toward the jungle. "Yeah, they've been circling us since about midnight. Very polite, actually. Haven't crossed into what they probably consider our territory. Shows good social awareness." Mox had somehow managed to weave himself a nest 30 feet up in a tree that looked like it was covered in natural razor wire. "Martinez, you do realize that the apex predators of this planet are currently hunting us, right?" "Well, technically they're investigating us," Jake corrected, pouring what smelled like surprisingly decent coffee. "There's a difference. Hunting involves a lot more immediate violence." That's when the underbrush exploded. The creature that emerged was exactly what Professor Kethler had described, if Professor Kethler had been secretly working for the Department of Understatement. The Shadow Maw was 12 feet of pure evolutionary nightmare, with 6 legs that ended in claws designed for shredding titanium, red eyes that glowed like laser sights, and a mouth full of teeth that belonged in a horror movie. Pip immediately activated her emergency beacon. Mox began praying to 17 different deities, including a few he'd just made up. Flen had somehow managed to compress himself into what appeared to be a single drop of extremely terrified jello. The Shadow Maw looked at them all with the kind of casual interest that apex predators reserve for things they were deciding whether to eat now or save for later. Its massive head swiveled, taking in the elaborate defensive positions, the cowering students, and finally settling on Jake, who was sitting cross-legged next to his campfire, holding his coffee mug and grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Oh my God," Jake said, his voice filled with the kind of wonder usually reserved for seeing newborn puppies. "You are magnificent." The Shadow Maw tilted its head, probably confused by the lack of screaming. "Look at you. Look at those eyes, and those claws. You're like a 6-legged tiger crossed with a dragon and a really enthusiastic dog." Jake set down his coffee and slowly reached into his survival kit. "I bet you're hungry, aren't you?" "Yes, you are. Who's a good apex predator? Who's the goodest boy?" "Martinez," Pip whispered from behind her barricade. "What are you doing?" "Making friends," Jake replied, pulling out one of his emergency rations. "Here you go, buddy. Premium synthetic protein. It's supposed to taste like beef, but honestly it's more like cardboard with delusions of grandeur." He tossed the ration toward the Shadow Maw, who caught it in mid-air with reflexes that defied physics. The massive creature sniffed it once, then swallowed it whole, and wagged its tail. "I knew it," Jake shouted, jumping to his feet. "You're just a really big dog. A really big, scary, could totally murder me dog, but still fundamentally a dog." The Shadow Maw's tail wagging intensified. It made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a growl, but definitely on the friendly side of terrifying. Jake grabbed the telescoping rod from his survival kit. "Want to play fetch? Yeah? You want to play fetch?" He extended the rod to its full length and threw it into the clearing. The Shadow Maw watched it fly through the air, looked back at Jake, looked at the rod again, then bounded after it with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever who just discovered tennis balls. From her hiding spot, Pip's compound eyes were recording everything. "This is impossible. Apex predators don't play games. They kill things and eat them." "Maybe they do both," Jake called back, as the Shadow Maw returned with the rod in its mouth, tail wagging so hard its entire back end was wiggling. "Good boy. Yes, you are. Who's a good Shadow Maw? You are!" The creature dropped the rod at Jake's feet and sat, which was impressive given that it weighed approximately as much as a small aircraft. "Okay, this is either the most amazing thing I've ever seen, or I'm having a stress-induced hallucination," Mox said from his tree. "Either way, I'm definitely failing this class." Jake scratched behind what he assumed were the Shadow Maw's ears, which caused the creature to make a sound that was definitely purring. "You know what your problem is? You've been misunderstood. Everyone thinks you're this scary monster, but you're just lonely, aren't you?" "Yeah, Stuck on this planet with no one to play with except other shadow maws, and they probably take themselves way too seriously. As if summoned by Jake's words, more red eyes began appearing at the edge of the clearing. 5 more shadow maws emerged from the jungle, each one as massive and intimidating as the first. "Oh good," Pip whimpered. "Now we're going to be eaten by the entire family." But instead of attacking, the new arrivals seemed curious about why one of their pack members was sitting like an oversized house pet, while a small alien creature scratched its ears. Jake looked up at the newcomers and grinned. "Hey guys, who wants to play fetch next?" Within 10 minutes he had 6 12-foot-tall apex predators sitting in a semicircle around him, tails wagging, waiting their turn to chase the telescoping rod. The sound of their collective purring was like standing next to a very happy jet engine. "This is definitely not in the course syllabus," Flynn managed to gurgle, having reformed enough to speak. By midday, what had started as a simple game of fetch had evolved into something that would have made professional dog trainers weep with envy. "Okay, Shadow," Jake said to the first Shadow Maw he'd befriended, who had somehow acquired a name and an apparent understanding of basic commands. "Sit, stay. Good boy. Now, when I throw the stick, you're going to wait until I point at you before you go get it. We're working on impulse control." 6 apex predators sat in a perfect line, each one weighing roughly 800 pounds and capable of crushing a tank, waiting patiently for their turn, like they were at obedience school. From behind her considerably smaller barricade, Pip was live-streaming the entire experience to her social media accounts. Her follower count had tripled in the past hour. "Day 2 of survival training. Human has domesticated the apex predators. I don't understand my life anymore." Jake pointed at the second Shadow Maw. "Okay, Fang, your turn." Fang bounded after the stick with the enthusiasm of a creature that had just discovered the concept of fun. The others waited their turn, tails wagging, occasionally play-fighting with each other in ways that would have registered on seismic sensors. "This is impossible," Mox declared from his tree, though he'd climbed down considerably since realizing the predators were more interested in playing than eating. "These creatures are supposed to be solitary hunters with no social behaviors beyond mating and territory disputes." "Well, maybe they're just bored," Jake replied, teaching what appeared to be advanced tricks to a creature that had, until yesterday, been considered the most dangerous life form on the planet. "Roll over, Spike. Good boy. You're getting treats tonight." "He's giving them names," Flynn observed, having managed to reform into something resembling his normal shape. "And they're responding to them." "Of course they're responding," Jake said, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. "They're pack animals. They want social structure, they want games, they want someone to tell them they're good boys. Look at this place, it's beautiful, but there's no enrichment, no toys, no puzzles, no variety. These guys have been going stir-crazy for generations." Meanwhile, several hundred miles away in orbit, Professor Kethlar was monitoring the situation via satellite feed, with the kind of expression usually reserved for watching one's entire worldview collapse in real time. "This is not how this is supposed to work," he muttered, watching Jake teach a Shadow Maw to shake hands. "The survival rate for this exercise is supposed to be 23%. The psychological trauma is supposed to build character. They're supposed to emerge as hardened survivors, not as recreational dark rectors for an alien petting zoo." His teaching assistant, a nervous crystalline named Kix, peered at the monitor. "Should we intervene, Professor? The human appears to be violating several fundamental assumptions about predator-prey relationships." "Violating?" Kethlar's tail lashed in frustration. "He's completely rewriting the laws of xenobiology. Look at this." On screen, Jake had apparently organized some kind of elaborate game that involved all 6 Shadow Maws, 3 of his classmates, and what appeared to be a complicated system of obstacles made from fallen logs and rocks. "It's like alien dog agility training," Pip was explaining to her streaming audience, "except the dogs are 12 feet tall and could theoretically eat a small spacecraft. Flynn is actually participating now. I think he's having fun." Indeed. Flynn had discovered that his gelatinous form made him excellent at weaving through obstacles, and was currently racing alongside a Shadow Maw named Claw, in what could only be described as an interspecies relay race. Even Mox had joined in, using his natural flight capabilities to set up increasingly complex aerial components to the course. "I maintain that this is highly irregular," he called out, while clearly enjoying himself, "but I admit the cardiovascular benefits are considerable." Jake stood in the middle of it all like a demented cruise director, cheering on both aliens and apex predators with equal enthusiasm. "Come on, team! Flynn, you're doing great. Spike, remember to wait for the signal. Mox, excellent form on that banking turn." "This is insane," Professor Kethlar growled, watching his carefully designed character-building exercise turn into what appeared to be summer camp for mixed species. 47 years I've been running this program. 47 years of creating stronger, more resilient students through controlled adversity. And this human turns it into recreational therapy. The students do appear to be learning valuable lessons about cooperation and interspecies communication, Kix offered helpfully. That's not the point, Kethlar snapped. The point is survival of the fittest, natural selection, character building through mortal terror. Back on the planet, Jake had apparently moved on to teaching the Shadow Maws synchronized movements. All 6 of them were now sitting, lying down, and rolling over in perfect unison, like the world's most terrifying boy band. And for our next trick, Jake announced to his audience of increasingly confident classmates, we're going to work on harmonized howling. I think we can get them to sing the university fight song. The resulting sound was something between a choir of angels and a squadron of fighter jets. But it was definitely musical, and it was definitely the university fight song. I need a drink, Professor Kethler muttered. A very large drink, possibly several. Professor, Kix said, pointing at another monitor. We're getting some unusual readings from the eastern quadrant. Something large is moving through the jungle toward their location. Kethlar perked up slightly. Large how? Significantly larger than a shadow maw. And it's not responding to any known behavioral patterns. A slow, predatory smile spread across the professor's reptilian features. Well now, perhaps this survival exercise isn't over quite yet. The singing had just reached its crescendo when everything went wrong. It started with Shadow, Jake's original Shadow Maw friend, suddenly going rigid in the middle of what had been an impressive bass harmony. His massive head swiveled toward the eastern tree line, ears flattened, and he made a sound Jake had never heard before. It wasn't a growl or a purr or anything playful. It was the sound of pure, primal terror. Within seconds, all 6 Shadow Maws had abandoned their formation and moved to form a protective circle around the humans and aliens, their earlier playfulness evaporating like water on a hot engine. Their hackles were raised, their claws extended, and they were making coordinated defensive movements that spoke of millions of years of evolutionary programming. Jake, Pip's voice was barely a whisper. What's happening? Why did they stop being friendly? Jake's easy smile faltered for the first time since landing on the planet. He'd spent enough time around Earth predators to recognize the universal body language of something that was suddenly very, very afraid. Something's coming, something that scares them. The jungle went quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a lazy afternoon, but the terrible quiet that happened when every living thing decided that making noise was a bad idea for continued survival. Then they heard it, a sound like a freight train being tortured, mixed with the screech of metal tearing and the kind of roar that bypassed the ears and went straight to the part of the brain that handled existential panic. Oh, Flint gurgled, having instinctively compressed himself into his most defensive form. That's not good. That's the opposite of good. The trees at the edge of the clearing began to fall, not break, not bend, but fall, as something massive pushed through them like they were grass. And when the creature finally emerged into the open, Jake understood why the Shadow Maws looked ready to run. The Void Ripper was everything a Shadow Maw was, but more. 15 feet tall, with 8 legs instead of 6, claws that looked like they'd been forged from black metal, and skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its eyes weren't just red, they were like looking into the heart of a dying star, and its mouth was full of teeth that belonged in geological formations rather than biological organisms. But the worst part was that it moved wrong. The Shadow Maws moved like big cats, with fluid grace and natural rhythm. The Void Ripper moved like physics was merely a suggestion, like gravity was something it could choose to ignore when convenient. Well, Jake said, his voice considerably less confident than usual. That's new. The Void Ripper's burning gaze swept across the clearing, taking in the cowering aliens, the defensive Shadow Maws, and finally settling on Jake with the kind of interest that suggested it had found something particularly amusing to destroy. Shadow took a step forward, placing himself directly between Jake and the Void Ripper, and let out a challenge roar that shook leaves from the remaining trees. The other Shadow Maws joined in, creating a wall of defiance that was both magnificent and utterly hopeless. It was like watching house cats try to intimidate a tank. The Void Ripper's response was a sound that wasn't quite laughter and wasn't quite screaming, but definitely conveyed its opinion about the Shadow Maw's chances. Okay, Jake said, his mind racing through possibilities. New plan. This is definitely not a fetch situation. No kidding, Mox shrieked from where he'd taken refuge behind the largest Shadow Maw. That thing is going to eat us all, starting with the biggest targets. The Void Ripper began to advance, and Jake realized with crystal clarity that everything he'd learned about Earth predators didn't apply here. This wasn't a territorial dispute or a hunting situation. This was something that killed for the pure joy of killing. And all his newfound friends were about to die protecting him. Not happening, Jake muttered, and did something that would have made his survival instructors back on Earth very proud and very worried. Instead of running, he stepped forward. "Hey!" he shouted at the Void Ripper, waving his arms. "Yeah, you! Big, dark, and ugly! Over here!" The creature's attention snapped to him, and Jake felt like he was looking into the event horizon of a black hole. But he kept talking, kept moving, because he'd noticed something important. The Shadow Maws weren't just afraid, they were coordinated afraid. They were moving like a unit, like they'd done this before. "Pip," Jake called, not taking his eyes off the Void Ripper. "Your species has compound eyes, right? Multiple visual spectrums?" "What?" "Yes, but why does that matter when we're all about to become alien chow?" "Because I need you to watch for patterns. Flynn, you can change your density, right? I need you ready to move fast. Mox, how's your aerial maneuverability in atmosphere?" "Are you seriously trying to fight that thing?" Mox squawked. "Not fight," Jake replied, as the Void Ripper took another step closer, its claws leaving gouges in the ground. "Coordinate. These guys," he gestured to the Shadow Maws, "they know how to handle this. They're pack hunters, remember? They just need a coordinator." The Void Ripper lunged, moving faster than something that size had any right to move. But Shadow was ready, dodging left while Fang went right, and suddenly Jake understood. They weren't trying to fight the thing head-on, they were trying to confuse it, divide its attention. "It's a pursuit predator," Jake shouted, pieces falling into place. "It's built for chasing single targets. Pip, confirm that." Pip's compound eyes were tracking the Void Ripper's movements. "Yes, its visual tracking is focused, not wide spectrum. It's losing the Shadow Maws when they separate." Jake grinned, and for the first time since the creature appeared, it wasn't entirely forced. "Okay then. Time for advanced pack tactics. Everyone listen up." What followed was the most insane 5 minutes in the history of interspecies cooperation. Jake became the coordinator, the pack leader calling out movements while the Shadow Maws executed them with precision born of instinct and desperation. Flynn became a mobile distraction, his gelatinous form allowing him to appear in multiple places at once. Mox provided aerial reconnaissance, calling out the Void Ripper's movements from above. Even Pip contributed, using her natural camouflage to create false movement signatures that confused the creature's targeting. Shadow, Claw, pincer movement from the north. Spike, Fang, distraction pattern 7. Flynn, maximum spread formation now. The Shadow Maws responded like they'd been training together for years, working in perfect coordination to keep the Void Ripper off balance, confused, and increasingly frustrated. Every time it focused on one target, 2 more would appear from unexpected angles. Every time it tried to use its superior size and strength, it found nothing substantial to hit. "It's working," Pip called out. "It's getting disoriented." But Jake could see the problem. They were winning tactically, but losing strategically. The Shadow Maws were getting tired, the Void Ripper was learning their patterns, and eventually it was going to connect with one of those massive claws. That's when inspiration struck, born from a childhood spent playing way too many strategy games and watching way too many nature documentaries. "New plan," Jake shouted. "We're not trying to defeat it, we're trying to make it leave." "How exactly do we convince a Void Ripper to go away?" Mox called from above. Jake looked at the terrain, at his exhausted alien friends, at his pack of domesticated apex predators, and at the frustrated Void Ripper that was getting angrier by the second. "By making it think we're not worth the trouble. Everyone, pattern Omega, make it rain!" What happened next would later be described in Pip's social media posts as the most ridiculous display of interspecies teamwork in recorded galactic history. The Shadow Maws formed a perfect circle around the Void Ripper. Flynn split himself into dozens of smaller forms, creating a dizzying array of targets. Mox began diving and climbing in seemingly random patterns that kept the creature's head moving, and Jake stood in the center of it all, not as bait, but as conductor, orchestrating chaos on a scale that turned the clearing into a 3-dimensional maze of confusion. The Void Ripper spun, lunged, and struck at targets that were never quite where they appeared to be. It roared in frustration as coordinated attacks came from every direction, too many to track, too fast to counter. And slowly, gradually, it began to realize that these weren't prey animals anymore. They were something else entirely. With a final roar of disgust, the Void Ripper turned and crashed back into the jungle, apparently deciding that whatever these strange creatures were, they weren't worth the energy expenditure. In the sudden silence that followed, Jake collapsed to his knees, adrenaline leaving him shaking. Around him, 6 shadow moths flopped down in exhaustion, tongues lolling out but tails still wagging weakly. "Did we just," Flen gurgled, reforming into a very tired puddle, "did we just make friends with apex predators and then use them to scare off an even worse predator?" "I think," Pitt said, her compound eyes still recording everything, "we just rewrote the textbook on survival tactics." Jake looked around at his exhausted, victorious team of aliens and domesticated monsters and started laughing. "You know what the best part is? We still have 6 hours left on this exercise." 3 weeks later, Professor Kethler sat in Dean Vorthak's office, staring at a stack of course evaluation forms that defied everything he understood about education, psychology, and the basic nature of reality. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Dean Vorthak said, her crystalline form refracting the office lights in patterns that suggested she was either amused or planning someone's academic execution. "Your survival course, which has maintained a 77% failure rate for 47 years, suddenly achieved a 100% success rate." "That's correct," Kethler replied through gritted teeth. "And not only did all the students survive, but they've submitted the highest course satisfaction ratings in the university's history." "Also correct. Including a 5-star review from that Zephyrian student that simply reads, 'Best class ever. Learned to pet a murder machine. Would definitely recommend. #Apex Predator Therapy.'" Kethlar's eye twitched. "Pip has been posting about it non-stop on social media. We've had 17 other universities request our curriculum materials." Dean Vorthak picked up another evaluation form, and this one from the Moldovan student says, and I quote, "Discovered I can be brave when working as part of a team. Also learned that humans are either insane or geniuses, possibly both. Changed my major to interspecies psychology." "Flen has been attending Jake's study groups," Kethlar admitted. "They're apparently working on a joint research project about pack dynamics in mixed species environments." "Fascinating." And the Celestial Hawk submitted a formal paper to the Journal of Applied Xenobiology titled "Reconsidering Predator Classification Through Behavioral Enrichment, a Field Study." It's already been cited 43 times. Mox keeps insisting that the shadow moths were exhibiting classic signs of understimulation and social deprivation, Kethlar said. He's not wrong, which is the most irritating part of this entire situation. Dean Vorthak set down the evaluations and fixed Kethlar with the kind of look that university administrators reserved for professors who had accidentally revolutionized their entire field. "And what about Mr. Martinez?" Kethlar was quiet for a long moment. He turned in a 30-page report analyzing the ecological and social structures of Razorclaw Prime, complete with detailed behavioral observations of previously unstudied pack interactions. "It's some of the most comprehensive xenobiological field research I've ever seen." But he also included a section titled Practical Applications for Interspecies Recreation Therapy, and suggested that we partner with the university's sports program to develop extreme fetch leagues. "And you're concerned about this because?" Kethlar slumped in his chair, the weight of academic tradition crushing down on him. "Because 3 different departments have already submitted funding requests for it. The athletics department wants to pilot an interspecies games program. The psychology department is designing studies on pack bonding across species barriers. And the engineering department is developing equipment for something they're calling multi-species obstacle course architecture." Dean Vorthak's crystalline structure brightened, which was generally a bad sign for everyone involved. "Professor Kethlar, in your professional opinion, did Mr. Martinez and his classmates learn valuable survival skills during this exercise?" "Well, yes, but..." "Did they demonstrate problem-solving abilities under extreme pressure?" "Technically, yes. However..." "Did they show adaptability, leadership, and the ability to work effectively with unknown variables?" Kethlar's shoulders sagged. Yes, they did all of those things." "Then it sounds like your course was a complete success." "But they weren't supposed to have fun," Kethlar exploded. "It was supposed to be character building through controlled adversity, psychological fortification through manageable trauma. The point was to create stronger individuals through hardship, not to turn apex predators into recreational therapy animals." Dean Vorthak was quiet for a moment, then picked up a datapad from her desk. "Professor, I have here the results from the standard post-course psychological evaluations that we run on all survival training participants." Kethlar braced himself. Previous cohorts typically show elevated stress indicators, trust issues, and what our counselors classify as adaptive hypervigilance. This group? She paused for effect. They show increased confidence, improved social bonding metrics, and enhanced cooperative problem-solving abilities. Oh, and they all signed up for advanced survival training next semester. Designed specifically to... Mr. Martinez specifically requested that the next exercise involve something with tentacles, because the pack dynamics would be completely different, and he's curious about cephalopod intelligence levels. Kethlar put his head in his hands. 47 years. 47 years of perfectly good character-building trauma, and one human turns it into summer camp for mixed-species friendship building. There was a knock at the door, and Jake Martinez poked his head in, grinning with the kind of enthusiasm that had become unfortunately familiar. Hey, Professor, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to run something by you, so... I've been corresponding with the Shadow Maw Research Station, and they're reporting that the pack we worked with has started exhibiting cooperative behaviors with other species on the planet. Apparently, they're now functioning as some kind of wildlife protection service. Wildlife protection service? Kethlar repeated weakly. Yeah, they're basically running interference between smaller predators and the herbivore populations, maintaining ecosystem balance through nonviolent conflict resolution. The Planetary Ecology Department is calling it unprecedented interspecies environmental management. Jake's grin widened. Oh, and they wanted me to ask if we could set up regular visits. The Shadow Maws get visibly excited when they pick up human scent signatures on the transport ships. Dean Vorthak leaned forward with interest. Mr. Martinez, would you be interested in a teaching assistant position? Absolutely. I was actually thinking we could expand the program. I mean, if this worked with apex predators, imagine what we could do with hive minds, or collective intelligences, or those crystal beings from the Andromeda sector. The applications for interspecies cooperation are virtually unlimited. Kethlar made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a death rattle. Excellent, Dean Vorthak said. Professor Kethlar, I believe you have a new curriculum to design. And Mr. Martinez, I think we need to discuss your graduate studies track. The university is creating a new department. Really? What's it called? Practical Xenopsychology and Interspecies Relations, with a focus on applied friendship theory. Jake's face lit up like he just discovered the universe was made of candy. Can we still call it survival training? Because honestly, I think making friends might be the ultimate survival skill. As Jake left the office, already talking enthusiastically about research proposals and funding applications, Kethlar sat in stunned silence. You know, Dean Vorthak said thoughtfully, in retrospect, perhaps the most important survival skill isn't learning how to defeat predators. Perhaps it's learning how to turn them into allies. Kethlar looked out the window at the campus, where he could see Pip, Flen, and Mox sitting together under a tree, apparently working on homework while discussing their next adventure. In the distance, a transport ship was preparing to depart for Razorclaw Prime, carrying what the manifest listed as recreational supplies for ongoing interspecies friendship research. I need a drink, he muttered. Professor? A very large drink. Possibly several. And then I need to figure out how to accidentally revolutionize xenobiology through recreational therapy on my academic resume. From somewhere across campus came the sound of students laughing, the kind of genuine carefree laughter that suggested they weren't afraid of the universe anymore. They were curious about it, excited to explore it, and confident they could make friends with whatever they found. And despite everything, despite his 47 years of carefully maintained academic tradition, Professor Kethlar found himself smiling. After all, if you couldn't beat them, you might as well teach them how to play fetch.